Nancy, our national president, would you please kick us off and get us going so that we honor the time?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm sure that since you've all been online here, starting out a little early and have greeted everyone, as Carol said, with a smile and a joyful countenance, you've already been welcomed, but I will extend an official welcome to this Conversations with Daughters, episode 8 of season 2. And we're delighted that you're here to join us. It's going to be filled with a lot of wonderful information, and I hope that you will gain a new understanding of where we are and where we are heading as an order. The conversation is being recorded on our YouTube channel. The Q&As that we have planned in and out throughout the afternoon will not be recorded, but if you do not wish to have your image on our YouTube channel, simply hit the movie camera icon on the bottom of your screen, and when you see the red line go through that, that means your image will not be available on our YouTube channel. I will begin with our prayer of the order, and as usual, we ask that you mute yourself so that there's no outside noise to distract any of our speakers, but you may certainly join in the prayer with me as I say it. Let us pray. O eternal Father, you have sent us your Son to teach us things pertaining to your heavenly kingdom. Give your blessing to our order wherever it may be throughout the world. Grant that we, your daughters, ever may discern your truth and bear the cross through the battles of our earthly life. Give us strength to overcome temptation and the grace to work to spread your kingdom and to gather your scattered sheep within your fold. Pour out upon us the sevenfold gift of the Holy Spirit, that we may always remember it is your work we are called to do, that all we think, do, or say may be pleasing in your sight. We ask it all for his sake, our King and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Oh, this brings back memories. Thank you, Monica. As you know, we are going to be discussing bylaws and some proposed changes. And of the thousands of words that govern the rules of bylaws for organizations, for us, as the Order of the Daughters of the King, bylaws are essentially our rule of life. It is how we perceive to move ahead as a unique organization and how we behave in those very same steps. Our triennial theme for 2024 is A New Day Dawns, and it's about new beginnings, and it is about the future. And the process of reviewing our bylaws is about how we move forward. We pray through every step of the process. The bylaw proposals that you will be shown that are on the national website have been prayed through every word. We trust that the Holy Spirit has guided that process. And we, in that process of praying, we are staying true to our roots, seeking clarity, but also an openness to widening the horizon for growth. So we ask you to listen intently and be sure to write down any questions that you have so that you may ask them later on. And we thank you for joining us. And I move this over now to Judy Bordelon, who is our bylaws chair. You are muted, Judy.
There we go. Thank you, Nancy. So a new day is dawning for the order, and we need our bylaws to reflect this dawn. We encourage inclusiveness, but our current bylaws don't necessarily reflect this. Change is necessary for growth. And if we want to grow, we need to look towards the future. So why are bylaws so important? Our bylaws rule and control the action of our members in the framework of the order. Bylaws are the rules made by the company or society, which for us is the Order of the Daughters of the King, to control the action of its members. They contain the organization's basic rule relating principally to itself as an order, and basic rules for the conduct of the order's business and affairs. Bylaws include all of the rules that the organization considers so important that cannot be changed without previous notice to members and the vote of a specific majority. Bylaws discuss issues like the officers of the order, the responsibility of your national council, how they're elected, terms of office, how and when the council meeting is held, and how the election will function. Bylaws permit change to adapt to new situations. Next slide. So amending our bylaws, the triennial business meeting is when the bylaws of the order can be amended. They have to be amended by 2/3 of the delegates. And real quick, the process that goes through. So back in the spring, I actually sent out a request or a call for anybody that was interested in submitting bylaws. And that's anything that they thought that needed to be changed in our current bylaws. So those came into the committee. The committee then reviewed them and decided which ones needed to go forward. They presented them to National Council. National Council helped submit them, prayed over them, and decided which ones would go on to triennial. So what you see today is what has gone through all of those steps. And today, what we're mainly doing, we're not going to be amending any bylaws today. We're just discussing the proposed changes and allowing you, the participants, and our daughters to ask questions and voice any concerns. The actual bylaws are out on the national website. We won't be actually giving you each individual bylaw today. All of the questions from today, as Carol's already said, will be posted in the bylaw form found under the community forum on the national website. And these proposals will be the ones that go to triennial in Louisville. It is at that time, at triennium, that delegates can amend the proposed bylaws as outlined by the Roberts Rule of Order during a regular business meeting. Besides today's conversation with daughters, we'll be holding another meeting in March. You will see articles in Crosslinks in the Royal Cross discussing the bylaws. And then at triennial, there'll be a couple of breakfast meetings that you can come and talk to us about bylaws or your concerns. So next slide. So as y'all know, National Convention is our triennial, and it's held every 3 years. It's governed by the body of the order, which is the voting delegates, and that consists of 15 elected members to National Council, the presidents of all the chapters, dioceses, and province assemblies, plus the DAL that's been elected from the province. These are who your delegates are that come to triennial. Each delegate is entitled to 1 vote, and the quorum for the business meeting at triennial is 1/3 of those voting. 1/3 of those delegates have to be there for us to hold a vote, and then it's 2/3 of the people that are there for a bylaw to pass. Next slide. So before we dive into these actual bylaws, let us say a prayer. Holy God, we come before you to ask directions as we view and discern the bylaws of the order. Grant us in our doubt and uncertainty, the grace to ask what you would have us do, that the spirit of wisdom will lead and direct us to discern your will and save us from false choices. Help us to be open to the views of the others and unite us in love as we work together for the betterment of the order and Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right. So if you go out into the chat, there is a link that Monica put out there that takes you to the community forum and to the bylaws. So there is a direct link there if you want to do that and access that information. So the proposed bylaws consist of 9 separate groups of changes and revisions. We'll address each section by itself, and scattered throughout the presentation today, there'll be questions and answers that you can bring up your concerns and questions. So the first change we'll be talking about, the first section, is contains 6 proposed bylaws that have to do with clarity. And as you see on the screen in front of you, 2 of them are bolded. The ones that are not bolded represent administrative changes to bylaws, and the bolded ones represent more substantiated change. So the changes that are included in this section of 6 bylaws is wording changes, reordering of bylaws for clarity, which means that we're just moving it from one place to another. New bylaws to prevent sub-entities of the order from applying for a separate nonprofit status. Modification of eligibility for presidency of the order, and enabling virtual delegates to convention if and when that's offered by National Council. So as mentioned earlier, the delegates will have an opportunity to accept, reject, or amend the bylaws during the business meeting in June. All right. And I think we have our first Q&A. Carol, I hand it back to you.
Not a problem. We got it. Monica, let's get big screen of everybody's face here. Thank you. As I said, we've got a lot of people on right now, so I would appreciate it if we only can keep these questions fairly short. We will answer as many as possible. If you have any questions, please do use the raise hand reaction if you have any questions on this first set of bylaws for clarity, moving things around so it makes more sense. Debbie Allen, go ahead.
My question is more pertains to the one with the tax status.
Okay.
That instead of each order having its own individual one, we would just have one tax ID?
So no, this is not about the EIN number, which is a tax ID number. This is specifically about tax exempt status, which is the 501c3. So the 501c3 needs to be owned by the order. It can't be owned by the sub entities of the order, essentially. And we had some issues where some dioceses and provinces weren't clear about that and tried to apply for tax exempt status, which they shouldn't do as sub-entities. It jeopardizes the 501c3 of the order as a whole. But the EIN number is a completely different thing. That is something that you need for a bank account, essentially. And there is a process for that. So if you need help with that, just call the national office and they will help you through that. But yes, you can have your own EIN. It's just the tax exempt status that is of concern.
Okay. Thank you.
I would like to remind everyone that the chat is also there for putting in questions. Kathy Hakinen had asked about the current number of terms a president can fill. Do we want to answer that one now, or should we wait a bit for that?
No, we can answer that now.
Go, Judy.
You want me to answer it?
Yes, please. Please.
Okay. Currently, if you are a province president, when you come on the board, you serve 1 term, which is 3 years. When you are elected to the board, you are also 3 years. So the current bylaw states to run for president, you have to serve 2 terms, which means for a president, so you have to have 1 term of a president and 1 term that you're elected. And if you are just an elected member and never served as president, then after your first term, your first 3 years, then you can run for president. One reason that we were looking at that is because, like, this term that we just had, we're just doing 2 years, not 3 years. And almost majority of the board are brand new members. They didn't serve as a province president prior, and they've never served on the board before. So we were just, and that's where it will come in. Y'all will decide if that's something that you want. Most of the past presidents served 2 terms before it was their 3rd term that they were elected. But Pam Runyon was actually in her 2nd term. She was, I don't know what she was before, but she did 1 term on national board. And then in her 2nd term, she ran as president. So that's just kind of the history of that bylaw. So we're just saying that instead of having the option, some have to have 1 term and some after 2 terms, everybody would require 2 terms before they could run for president in their 3rd term.
All right.
I'm going to jump in and just ask if Kathy really meant how many the current number of terms a president can fill, because technically we are changing that if this bylaw gets adopted, because technically right now, if you are elected and serve a full term and are elected again, you can run for president, and you could be elected a 3rd time and run for president again. So theoretically, you could actually serve 2 terms right now, and this would change it so that you actually could only serve 1 term, because you would have to be elected that 3rd time in order to run for president.
Right.
Maybe that answers that.
Kathy, does that help?
A lot of answers there.
If you have any extra question on that, Kathy, go ahead, unmute and ask.
I think I'm more confused now, Monica, than I was before. So a president could be president for 2 terms, 3 terms?
Right now, theoretically, a person could be president for 2 terms. Theoretically, yes.
And that might be changing them?
So this would change that so that you would not be able to run for president unless you had been elected and served 2 full terms. So you wouldn't be electable as president until your 3rd term.
Okay.
Your 3rd and last term, right? Because we're limited to 3 terms currently.
Thank you.
Okay, not seeing any other questions. Let's go ahead and move on to what we have. Oh yes, and we were just reminded that the terminology is to stand for office and not run. Thank you. Yes,
Right.
I appreciate that. All right. Let's get the PowerPoint back up and go on to section 2. Again, if you have any questions that we just didn't get to, feel free to put them in the chat. We will also have time at the end to talk things over. All right. In the second change that we're talking about, there is a suggestion to adopt a geographic definition for our diocesan assemblies instead of the definition of a denominational entity. Historically, we've been using the denominational definitions of a diocese, an Episcopal diocese. And what we will do here is to allow for changing that to a geographical definition. So the map is currently published in the chapter manual, and it is based on the historical connection that we have to the Episcopal Church. But let me show you what we're talking about for what we're looking at too. Because remember, 3 daughters make a chapter, at least 3 daughters make a chapter, at least 3 chapters, or any junior chapters, or any daughters at large, all together make a diocesan assembly, and then that goes on to make a provincial assembly. But to give you an example, I am currently the the diocesan assembly president of Chicago. And this is what I look at to figure out who I need to talk to about things. Next slide, please. For the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago, I almost said Iowa. Wow, that takes me back way too many years. This is the geographical base of the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago. Within that area, we also have Catholic Archdiocese. Let's see if that's the next one. Yep. All the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Illinois are there. We've got Chicago and Rockford and Joliet and Peoria and Springfield. So all of those, oh, and Belleville, way it's south, but we're not, I don't deal with that. If I needed to talk with anyone's bishop, that's where I'd have to figure out where to go. Now, we also have Lutheran daughters in DOK. And here are the 3 separate synods in Illinois of the Lutheran Church, of the ELCA. We've got the Metro Chicago, we've got Northern Illinois and Southern Illinois. So if you mix all those together, that's what we look at for, all right, how many different places and ideas and such. The entire area, the entire colored area is the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago, the geographical boundaries of that. But within that, we also have the Catholic Archdiocese and the Lutheran synods. So instead of worrying about, yes, we've got the Episcopal Diocese of Chicago all the way down here, but you know, we're also talking about the Southern Central Chicago, Central Illinois ELCA Synod, way down at the bottom there. So if we want to use a term that is all encompassing, that is inclusive for everyone, because the Diocese of Chicago doesn't mean a whole lot to some of the daughters that we have, because they're another faith. But we also want to include absolutely everyone. Do you have another slide for me, or? Oh, good. We're good then. Then we'll go on to Monica, who will talk about the same idea, but instead of for diocesan assemblies, we'll talk about provincial assemblies.
As Carol just said, the same idea is true for provincial assemblies. Those are historically related to the provinces of the Episcopal Church. Changing to a geographic definition helps us alleviate some of the issues that we have that are the same as we have with diocesan assemblies. It also is a forward-looking move, which is to say that currently, for instance, 50% of our daughters roughly are in Province 4. And Province 1 is like a fraction of a percent. So there is a huge imbalance in terms of how our provinces are designed, which creates some problems with governance. So for instance, the Province 4 president is basically a full-time, unpaid volunteer position, but essentially is full-time. Which is, you know, vastly different than what's happening in the other provinces. And this move to change it to geographical definitions would allow the National Council to decide on, not immediately, but there would be some method, we could put a method in place by which we could decide if we wanted to shift those boundaries to even things out depending on how we want governance to work. Now, nobody expects that to happen anytime soon, but it would be an avenue that we could use for the future of the order. Minion, you're muted.
Yep, we are now into our Q&A section. So if you have questions about this and want to talk about it, we've got about 5 minutes to do that. So Minion, you're up.
Thank you, Carol. Hello, everyone. My question is as a new person as well. So in the example you gave, if I understood you correctly, you would have to go to at least 3 different areas or 3 different groups to gather information. Like you had to go to the Lutheran, you have to go to the Catholic as well as the Episcopal
Well, it's
chapters
more
as
along
well.
right. It's more along the lines of being aware of what they are looking at. Being aware that I, coming in as an Episcopalian to a Roman Catholic church, just understanding the ins and outs of that a little bit better, being a little sensitive to language and their needs versus my needs as an Episcopalian. It's just being aware of who we are and where we are. And you know, if they feel they have to ask a question, or if they want me to talk to somebody, that's it's just awareness for me, I guess. Monica, you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, we have some chapters that are Roman Catholic. We have, you know, we are predominantly Episcopalian. And so our references to a diocese or a diocesan assembly are typically of the Episcopal version of that. But we do have Roman Catholic chapters. We do have ELCA chapters. So if they're all getting together for an assembly, for instance, which region, where do those chapters, what assembly do those chapters attend? And this basically allows us to say, look, it's a geographic definition, not an Episcopal definition.
And my follow-on question to that, thank you, Monica,
Yep.
is to ask, they are just like any other Episcopal DOK chapter. They're treated the same way.
Absolutely. They are a DOK chapter, period. End of conversation. You know, so there's no differences at all. Yeah. Does
Thank you, Carol.
that help, Minion?
Yes.
We got a couple other questions. Kathy Hakinen, you had your hand up first, please.
So currently, your diocese is our diocese, the Chicago diocese. What would it be called? Would we change the name of that so that it's not just called the?
Well,
Chicago
what we would
diocese?
do, what we're doing right now is opening the possibilities of change in the future, if that is something that is wanted by the order down the road. Right now, for example, in my area, there is a possibility of a chapter way up in the northwest corner of Illinois, in Galena. You might want to, because it's closer for them to go to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in a different diocesan assembly, it's in a different province. They might want to go to that space for some of their actions. So it just depends. Right now, we are not changing any name, not changing any boundaries. We are just opening up the possibility for a move in the future if it makes sense. Okay, Karen Vaughn, you had a question, and we've got time for 2 more after that.
Yeah, essentially it was the same question. What would you call it? I mean, I can understand. I hadn't thought about the fact that you have different designations based on whether you're ELCA or Roman Catholic. So I see the sense of it, but what it would be called, if it's going to be geographic, is it Northern Illinois? Is it, you know, whatever? That is an issue, but so thank you so much. That was my question.
It was discussed at National Council when we started looking at these. I can say that there is no intent to change any of that right now. There are some legal provisions that we have to make, which is that we can't name it the same as something that we already have a name for, essentially. So, that would all be, that's sort of future policy, and that's really policy territory and not so much bylaw territory. And that would be, you know, National Council would have to come up with some policies around that.
Okay, we have time for one last question, and Crystal Evans, if you would unmute yourself. Kathy Schultz, if you'd put your question or
Carol,
comment, please.
Can I say?
Oh yeah, Judy, go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot I was mute. Just to answer their question right now, like I'm in the Diocese of Western Louisiana, the Diocesan Assembly, if we change it according to the bylaws, it would become district. So I would become, instead of the Diocese of Western Louisiana, I would be the District of Western Louisiana. So we're not going to change anything right now. So if you're the Diocese of Arkansas, you're going to become the District of Arkansas. And then that nothing's going to go further until we set up some more rules. Now there's some other, so if you're in, like she was saying, you're closer to one diocese than the other, your diocese, you would whatever diocese that is, you would just be part of that diocese, which we are now proposing we change to district. And so that's all we're doing right now. So we're not actually changing anything or changing any names. We're just putting what's going to be in front of whatever the current diocese is.
Go ahead, Crystal.
Okay.
And Kathy Schultz, if you wouldn't mind putting your comment in the chat, that would be great.
Hey, my question is, so if this proposal goes through and is approved as a bylaw, a change in bylaw, then is the intent for it to change the boundaries of these areas? And in effect, one of the motivations for that is to maybe even out the province 4, so that it's like divided among the other provinces, since there are so many members in that area, and we're just trying to make it a little bit more equitable across all the provinces. Is that the intent?
Monica, take it.
There are two primary motivations for this. And okay, so all 9 of these, well, these like 2 through 6 basically are all related to one another in many ways. And there are 2 major motivations for them. One is to allow for the multi-denominational stuff that we have going on, right? So, and we haven't even mentioned the Anglican, the Anglican diocese and that as well, right? So we have this and so this enables us to really accommodate the multi-denominational nature of the order by essentially retaining, like, we basically are controlling what those geographic boundaries are, okay? And the second is to make it possible to change the geographic boundaries if we want to, right? So there's no intent to change them right away, but and you'll see this a little bit, you'll see this with change number 6, right? This is where change number 6 comes in. In province 1, we have 7 Episcopal dioceses. 6 are unassembled. I have 1 assembled diocese here. So if I could take, but they're tiny, right? So geographically, they're very close to one another. So if I could take Connecticut and Massachusetts and put them together, I would have a lovely assembly. And I can't do that the way the bylaws are written right now.
That's what my question was referring to. It's allowing us to have assembly for those that are non-assembled. Okay.
The province question is a much bigger question, and that's many years down the line, most likely, but it is something that we could do because we are basically saying we control the boundaries of these entities.
Awesome. I love it.
Okay. You're muted, Carol. Oh, she's probably, I think we're
Let's
ready.
go on. I do appreciate that. Let's go on though to we're talking. That's you.
Uh-oh. Carol's having Wi-Fi troubles. I mean, I can answer a couple of these really quickly. There would be no impact at the moment. At the moment, there's no impact of this change, right? All it does is change how we can define these things. It doesn't change any daughters group that has a mix of Episcopal, ELCA. Hopefully it helps them because it makes life a little bit easier, because because the order is the entity controlling those divisions, right? Okay. So to move on to change number 4, change number 4 is really an administrative change and not that big a deal. There are 2 different places in the bylaws currently where we define membership in a chapter. This is not membership in the order. I want to point out this. We're not talking about that. We're talking about chapters. And there is a whole reference to non-church related institutions, which means things like seminaries or assisted living facilities where people have wanted or, have established chapters. These are not churches. Therefore, they don't have clergy who are in charge of them. And for some reason, the bylaws got written in such a way that those ended up in two different places, and it's very confusing, even though the membership requirements are actually identical. So we're mushing those together and making it one clearer bylaw. It makes one other little change that we'll show in just a minute. Like it incorporates a change number 5 as well. So. Okay, so I'm just going to go on to change number 5 because that makes the most sense. Come here, change number 5. Okay, Nancy, do you want to talk about this a little bit?
I will just interject about the references to bishops. And this bylaw isn't designed to change our current relationship with our bishops. They are most important, the bishops that we have, not only of our diocese, but the bishops we have in our own areas. Basically, as an example, it's referring to the way we're back to the way things have always been. And when I was in search of a national chaplain, it has always usually been a bishop. And as you know, bishops are extremely busy. And to find a current acting bishop, I could not. They were just all too busy. I even had 2 friends that were very close to me, and they said, we just cannot put anything else on our plate. So they directed me to retired bishops. And right now, there are not very many. And they are, once they have worked so long and they're retired, they want to be retired, most of them. So upon the advice of a past national president and looking back into the archives, there's no rule that says the national chaplain has to be a bishop. So it's basically giving credence and love and attention for all the gifts of every single clergy person. And that's what we're about in using to remove references to bishops. And Monica can go ahead and explain where those references to bishops are.
Right. So there are really only 2 places in the bylaws that require bishops. One is for these non-church institution chapters, which require the approval of a bishop. And so again, in a multi-denominational context, what does that mean? Who gets to approve that? And the other is the formation of what we call bishops chapters, which are again, chapters that are not directly related to a church. So this is what we have referred to in the past as an entity that it's often daughters at large who get together to form a single chapter, or daughters across multiple churches that get together to form a chapter. We have referred to that in the past as a bishop's chapter. So these bylaws changes really just remove those sort of really what are fleeting references to bishops, and instead in their place they put in the oversight of a chaplain or a I think it just says chaplain, or other spiritual director. So if it's a non-church institution like a seminary, for instance, it would be the spiritual leader at the seminary, who you would want to sign off on that chapter. If it's a bishop's chapter, we won't call it a bishop's chapter. We now call it a diocesan assembly chapter, and that would be the diocesan chaplain who would approve that.
Okay, we are ready for questions now. So does anyone have any questions about this change, removing the word bishop from the requirements, and changing to more inclusive or appropriate language.
I have a question. Marilyn
Yes, Marilyn.
DeSalt. Yeah, I'm glad to meet you all. I belong to Trinity in Vero Beach, Florida, in the Trinity chapter. And as I'm listening, I realize that there are chapters that are not church affiliated. Do you have to be church affiliated to be a member of the Daughters?
To be a member of the Daughters, no.
Okay, so
this was definitions about chapters, not Daughters membership.
So to have a chapter that is not church affiliated,
yes,
our bylaws basically say that you have to have the approval of a bishop. And so that's exactly what we're changing.
okay.
Changing it so that it no longer requires a bishop, it requires the chaplain.
For example, and this is probably important to some of our members, is that there is currently a daughter who is in assisted living, who has been talking about Daughters to the other women in her assisted living facility. And they're thinking about possibly starting a chapter. Now, there's not a church that they are all affiliated with right there, but still that they could, especially with these rules changes, easily form a chapter. Right now, that chapter would have to have the permission of the bishop.
Okay.
If they say have a chaplain involved with them, a retired bishop, a retired priest, a priest of the church that most of them go to, whoever it is that is a clergy person who can help with the spiritual formation of that chapter. That's what this is allowing, so that we're not overloading bishops with all this extra work and this would also allow for the chapters to have more connection with their chaplain. Because if it's only the bishop, you may not get much connection. But if they have a chaplain that is more easily accessible to them, that would be a possibility. Okay, I took up a lot of time there. I apologize. Minion, you had a question. Go for it.
Muted. You're muted. Minion, you're muted still.
You're muted, Minion.
This is Jenny Sears from Province 8
Hang on,
in
Virginia.
Anchorage,
can you wait?
Alaska.
Virginia, can you wait just a second and let Minion go first, and then we'll get your question.
Okay.
It was my boop. I didn't unmute myself. So if I'm in a nursing home or assisted living, is the requirement still to have 3 potential Daughters to make a chapter, or is that change in any way, shape?
That will be the same. Absolutely.
Okay.
And the membership requirements are still the same. So you still have to be a member of, I forget how it's, a woman communicant of the Episcopal Church, the Episcopate, the church is in communion with it. So we're not changing that.
Okay, thank you.
Jenny.
Okay, this is Jenny Sears from Anchorage, Alaska. I've been a daughter since 1993, and I took a few years off, so I'm having to go back through it. But I would just like to make sure, thank you. My mom was also a daughter, and my sister's a daughter. I would, excuse me, like to make sure that the chaplain has some clergy relationship. It's not just a lay person, shall I say. Is the intent to change it to be the chaplain to be a lay person, not clergy trained?
So no. So this is an interesting point, Jenny, which is that in fact there's a little hole in our bylaws here, or perhaps it's really a policy problem. I don't know, but we actually don't have a definition of chaplain anywhere in our bylaws. So that is for somebody else to tackle, for another national council to work with. And there are ways that could be resolved by policy, right? So we could just develop a policy saying this is how you choose a chaplain. I don't think anybody so the people who choose chaplains are, chapter presidents, diocesan presidents, provincial presidents, who would all pick a clergy person for that role. It's unlikely that they would pick a non-clergy person for that role. But there's some work to do there. But
Okay.
that's not the intent by any means.
Judy.
And it's also important to note that chaplains can still be bishops. Bishops can be chaplains, right? So this really doesn't change our relationship with bishops at all. It just removes these little niggly places in the bylaws that are kind of problematic for us in this multi-denominational world that we live in.
In
Okay,
Virginia,
thank you.
the clergy,
All right.
our anticipation is that they are ordained.
Go ahead, Judy.
The thought is that all clergy are ordained persons, so they won't be lay people.
Yeah.
Like
You
she said,
meant
all right,
chaplain. You meant chaplains. All chaplains.
Chaplains.
All
are-
chaplains.
And all of our
Yeah, not
literature
clergy.
refers to chaplains as ordained people. So it's, yeah.
All right, we have time for one last question. Miss Edith, please unmute yourself and let us know.
Barbara, I'm on a Zoom call. I'll call you back.
Thank you very
Barbara?
much. I'm Edith Wilkin, and I'm president of the Mary and Martha chapter in Castle Rock, Colorado. We recently called a new chaplain, and that was in consulting with our priest in charge, who essentially determined that the chaplain actually does not have to be an ordained clergy person. The person that we called is actually a certified chaplain. So she has gone through training and education and has experience as a chaplain. And so this conversation is actually quite interesting to me, because clearly there is some, I guess, it's a little nebulous there,
So your
because
priest in
it's
charge
not
is right.
totally defined,
Right.
which
correct.
in a way is good, because in our case, it allowed our priest in charge to essentially endorse this person, because she does have the credentials as a chaplain and intimately involved with the parish.
This is a fantastic, I'm going to make a little pitch here for people to get involved in National Council and get involved in things like creating bylaws, because it allows you to help craft these decisions. And that, as your priest in charge pointed out, there is no rule. We have no rule about who chaplains, what qualifies a chaplain to be a chaplain. We don't have a rule for that. So if that's something that is of concern, it's not actually of concern to me, because in that case, let's point out that your priest in charge has basically said, this is the chaplain I want you to have. And so there is a clergy person involved in that discussion. So
Yep. And I just wanted to point out in the chat, Crystal Evans said that it's becoming more and more difficult to find ordained clergy to become chaplains. So we need to be careful about putting that limitation on chaplains. And that's what bylaws are all about. Do we want our bylaws to limit us, or do we want our bylaws to allow us to grow, to approach the new day that the Lord is giving us, so that we can grow into who we are all meant to be as daughters, as members of chapters, as DALs, and all the way up through being a daughter at the national level. So I really appreciate, these are all fantastic questions. And we really do need to move on to the next section.
we did 5. Okay.
Yeah.
We're at change number 6, which all of that stuff before 2, 3, 4, 5, and 5 are really all to get to this point, which allows us to flexibly move where chapters exist, right? So it allows us to, so we have now already made it so that you can do a geographic designation, but right, so theoretically we could just redefine the diocesan boundaries, but that might be more than we really want to go through. So this bylaw puts in place a way for us to form assemblies of the unassembled chapters. So for instance, I've got Connecticut, I've got 2 chapters in Connecticut and 1 chapter in Massachusetts, and I could put them together and create an assembly for them, right? For those 3 chapters. It would enable us to have chapters join a neighboring diocesan assembly. Or I could take Massachusetts and put it in Western Massachusetts and combine those 2, you know, basically say you're now part of Western Massachusetts, which is assembled, and you're part of that assembly. So it would allow me to do that with that chapter. And the third case is, we've got some cases, not so much in New England, but in California, for instance, there are some chapters that are very far out, that are hundreds of miles from any other chapters in the diocesan assembly that they are in, but are only tens of miles from some chapters that are in the neighboring diocesan assembly. And it would allow us to just move them into that diocesan assembly instead of leaving them where they are. Now, it is important to note that this kind of movement does affect the way that funds get distributed across the order. So that is a thing to keep in mind, which is to say, I think, hopefully you all know this, that a portion of your dues goes to the diocesan assembly, goes to your province, a portion goes to your diocesan assembly. And so if we move a chapter, those portions of dues would be going to that diocesan assembly, not the one that you were originally in, if that makes sense. So there is you know, this would be used probably sparingly because of those reasons, but it is a way that we could assemble some of the unassembled dioceses around the country and handle some of the chapters that are sort of feeling like they're far away and not able to get to the assembly that they might want to, and instead can participate in an assembly that is closer to them. All right.
And I just wanted to reiterate that what Monica said is this will be probably very sparingly used. This is not something that will cause the entire map to change. This will probably be a case-by-case basis. And for most people, it won't even come up in most chapters' lives. But for those for whom it makes sense, it will be really important to be able to talk about these sorts of changes. So that's what, again, do we want our bylaws to limit us and hem us in, or do we want our bylaws to allow us to grow? So do we have, we already have a question, Adrian, please. And remember, if you have a question, please do use the raise hand reaction, and we'd be able to get you that much faster. So Adrian, please do unmute yourself and ask your question. There you are.
It really wasn't a question, but it was a comment that women would love to be closer to a diocese that's close to where they live, and it would be a way of keeping up membership, because many people will say, oh, I'm 100 miles away from a diocese, so I can't come. So it's no use for me being a daughter because I can't get there. So if you're closer to a diocese, it would make it much easier. And even though the money is going to be allocated someplace else, they're still getting the money.
Exactly. And out here in the Midwest, we don't talk about how many miles there are. How many hours do you have to drive? and that's exactly it. Okay. Joan, please unmute yourself.
Uh-oh. She turned her camera off. Did
Yep.
she exit the meeting by mistake? Uh-oh.
No, she's still there. Let's see here.
Oh, we're waiting for you to get to unmute.
Okay, I'll answer a quick question. A deanery is a different sort of designation that doesn't really relate to how daughters organize themselves. It's more of an internal diocesan designation. We'll get you, Joan. We really will. There you go.
I just figured it out.
You did it.
Well, I'm almost 90, but I'm doing pretty good here.
Hey, Jen.
Anyway, a long time ago when I was a Southeast Florida diocesan president, our diocese is so big in Southeast Florida. We're like a province, you know, we go from the panhandle of Florida all the way down to Key West. So I'd set up deaneries. So we had a north deanery. We had, and then we called it the West Palm Beach deanery, and the Broward deanery, and then the Key West deanery. And it allowed, then we set up things where they could have their own meetings and stuff. And this is long before we had Zoom or anything to contact. The only way we had was either snail mail or a telephone call. So, but now it's
and that made sense for Florida. That made a whole lot of sense for Florida. Doing something like that would make absolutely no sense for another place.
No, right. So I think individually in each province, and in each deanery, in each diocese, it's altogether different everywhere. So so I think it's going to be interesting to see what you all do.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions about this? If not, we will move on to our last few discussion or sections that we're going to talk about. And these are the easy ones, right?
All right. These are the last three changes. They are simply terminology substitutions. Okay. So change 7 is changing the term diocesan assembly to district and changing the province assembly to region throughout the bylaws. That means anywhere in the bylaws that says diocesan assembly, it will now say district, and anywhere it says provincial assembly, it will say region. So it's mainly for ease and for lack of, for confusion. The terms can sometimes be difficult and lengthy, especially if you're printing them when you're having to say the assembly of. And a lot of times in the colloquial speech, daughters revert to diocese and province. I know I do all the time, just out of habit. And so the other thing, dioceses and provinces aren't always applicable to all the other denominations in the order. So it would help give more of a commonality. And so if you have a Anglican, Lutheran, Roman Catholic, and Episcopal, and they may be actually separate, they may all be in the same geographical area, but they're in separate dioceses. They could actually become one diocese because that geographical area includes all of them, and then they would become
one district.
Right. So that would help with that. Change 8 has to do with what we talked about, changing priest to clergy. And this is just, clergy is a term widely used in all denominations of the order, where priest is not. The term priest is consistently used in priest in charge, and it would just substitute to clergy in charge. So it's mainly just substituting one term for another for clarity. And then the last one has to affect the junior daughters, changing directress to mentor. And it's just, several people have said that the term directress is old-fashioned and incongruous with the contemporary understanding of language for women's roles, and they've asked us to change it. So that's mainly what that is. And the junior daughters came up with mentor, and that's how we came up with that term. So that's it.
All right. Again, if you have a question, please do use the raise hand icon under reactions, and we'll talk about this. Okay, Marilyn, go for it. You'll be the first questioner.
I being Roman Catholic and then Episcopal, I love the whole idea. I have a question though. Supposing the priest in charge, for example, of our chapter decides that he doesn't want us to do that. He doesn't like the changes that you've made, because Father Chris who is our priest in charge, he won't even let us change our bylaws.
I think that's something that to be maybe your district president or your provincial president can help you work with that priest in charge to help him understand what the bylaws mean and how they affect you and your chapter. I don't think that's something that the order besides that can really get into, but those are two separate entities. What we're talking about is the order's bylaws and the governance of the order. And yes, your priest in charge is very important to how things run within your chapter. And so if there are conflicts or questions or whatever, that's something that can be addressed at some different levels to help mediate that.
Carol, I understand what you're saying. I am an attorney. I am an attorney by trade. So I fully understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying is all of this, as I'm listening to this reorganization, still depends, based on my experience at my chapter, on whether or not the priest in charge allows it. And that is, as I listen to this, it's something that is very not concerning, but very evident that the daughters are an international as well as a national organization that are looking to expand rather than contract. And so that's just something I'm concerned about. As I listen to this, I love the ideas, but I don't want to be stymied. I will follow your advice in terms of seeking alternate help, but I can just tell you that that's going to be a very difficult situation for us.
And I'm sure you're not the only one.
Right.
Nancy, do you want to speak to that at all? I don't want to put you on the spot, so no isn't appropriate.
Yeah. No, yeah. And this certainly is not the forum for that, because in each of those situations, it is very, very much a sense of not right or wrong, but authority, and needs to be discussed with the utmost care and the utmost dignity and compassion. So I would seek out any further help from perhaps even the national
if you have a provincial chaplain or national chaplain,
And,
that would be
the other thing out there. We do have churches that had daughters that when new priests came in would not allow the daughters to function. And so that is always the possibility, because we are there at the blessing of the priest in charge. So, all of that has to be taken into consideration, and it's always a delicate situation.
Yep. We are now past the top of the hour, so we've gone a little longer than we normally do. What I would suggest that we do now is close the official part of this Conversations with Daughters, but we will stay on. We will leave the Zoom link open for as long as you want for other questions and just discussions of all of these things. We'll also remind you that if you have any questions, put them in the chat. The forums will be open so that we will have different sections for each of these changes, so that the discussion can continue, our conversation with you and within us as daughters can continue on the forums. And there will also be, Judy, do you want to talk about where else, again, the discussions can take place?
Sure. If you go to the national website, you have to sign in as your member, and then you can click on Community Forum. And when you click on Community Forum, it's like in the middle of the homepage. It will take you to the bylaw forum. I mean, there'll be several forums out there, so you have to pick the bylaw forum. And when you click that one, it gives you access to the current bylaws, the new proposed bylaws, and all the questions that are out there. And you can ask new questions, and we try to respond as best we can, timely. And these forum questions that we have today will be set up as FAQs out there on that bylaw forum.
There will also be other, not conversation with daughters.
There'll be another
meetings,
Zoom in
but
March. Right.
there will be other times that you can get online and discuss this with the bylaws committee, and then a couple of breakfasts at our national convention.
Yes.
And I would also chime in and say, if you are at the diocesan level or some such, and you want to have somebody from the bylaws committee come and talk to your diocesan assembly, please get in touch with us, and we would be happy to do that and walk through these.
And if anybody on the calls in Province 7, we have a Province 7 assembly in March, and I will be holding a workshop then for bylaws.
All right. And since you're here for Conversations with Daughters, I want to let you know that the next Conversation with Daughters will be March 23rd. And we will be talking about re-envisioning the Self-Denial Fund, getting an update on what we have learned and done, and figure out what else is coming next. So that will be on March 23rd. And I hope to see you all then. And until then, Nancy, would you please lead us in the motto? Please mute yourself if you'd like to join in.
For his sake, I am but
one.
But I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. What I can do, I ought to do. What I ought to do, by the grace of God, I will do. Lord, what will you have me do?